scalp laceration, orbital fracture, jaw fracture, right scapula fracture, right clavicle fracture, multiple rib fractures on the right, rib fractures on the left, liver laceration, right kneecap fracture, right ankle fracture, left tibia fracture, left ankle fracture, collapsed lung, and a left foot fracture. All of these things happened to Jeremy Renner on January 1st, 2023. Wow, big machine.
Someone's been run over by a snowcat. Hurry.
Okay, tell me exactly what happened. Are there any obvious injuries?
Oh my God.
Oh, look at that.
I just have to ask the questions. They're on their way.
Yeah, there's a lot of blood over here, so you gotta get somebody over here.
Racing to save a man run over by a large machine. It weighs 14,300 pounds.
14,300 pounds. Notice the tires there on the track, guys.
And there was so much blood in the snow. And then when I looked at his head, it appeared to me to be cracked wide open, and I could see white. I don't know if that was his skull, maybe it was just my imagination, but that's what I thought I saw.
Most likely what he was staring at is fresh skull bone.
He had some blood coming out of his ears, his nose for sure, and then his eye, looked like it had been pushed out.
So why would he have blood coming out of his ear? Potentially what could have happened here is when he got run over by the snowcat, it fractured the bones of the skull. Particularly, we can get one called a basilar skull fracture, and that leads to the ear canal, and you can have blood coming out of your ear. So sometimes bleeding out of the ear can be indicative of a basilar skull fracture. The other thing he mentioned was that the eye looked like it was out of the socket, so most likely he sustained multiple fractures of the orbit, which caused the eyeball to actually protrude out of the socket.
I could tell he was really struggling to breathe.
This was a sound of someone that was dying.
Yeah, he's got broken ribs. He's probably got puncture blood.
Again, focus on the snowcat tires throughout this video.
He's conscious.
Well, it probably ran him over in the snow, so it would cushion. No, it was on the street. It was just
asphalt.
On the asphalt. Yep. At one point, he just got a clammy feel to him, and he turned this gray-green color, and I feel in my heart that I feel like I lost him for a second. He closed his eyes.
Couple of important things here. One thing that worked against Jeremy in this accident is he was actually on the asphalt when the snowcat ran him over. The problem with that is he sustained more pressure from the machine, because if he was on snow, it would have pushed him into the snow and probably relieved some of the pressure of the snowcat. So why do you think he was looking green and gray? Now, I have seen lots of different traumas, and there are multiple types of traumatic shock that you can have. But most commonly, what's probably happening in Jeremy's case is he's suffering from what's called hypovolemic shock. When you start to lose enough of your circulating blood volume, the whole peripheral system clamps down, there's not enough blood flowing, and that can lead to that grayish greenish color that she was talking about. The fact of the matter is, she's probably not wrong. He was literally dying right in front of her.
We want to try to show you what he remembers.
Because it's going right at my nephew.
This is when the fast-moving tracks hurl him forward in front of the machine.
That's gonna be a problem. Is that my existence now?
So let me dial it back a second and tell you what actually happened, because I've watched this full video. Jeremy has a home up in the hills of Nevada. Because their truck was stuck in the driveway, they were going to use the snowcat to tow the truck out into the street so they could go use it. Jeremy said the snowcat was sliding a little bit on the ice, and so he wanted to remaneuver the machine and reposition it so that he could actually have it not slide into his nephew. To do that, he pulled the snowcat up the driveway, he turned around, repositioned it, and it was actually now facing more forward towards the car itself. As he was getting close to the car and coming to stop at the snowcat, he opened the door to lean out because he couldn't see his nephew and he was worried about his nephew. At that point, Jeremy actually falls out of the snowcat onto the ground. This isn't where he got injured. As the snowcat started to move forward because he didn't put the brake on, he tries to jump back into the snowcat, jumping onto the track itself. Because it was moving forward, it threw him forward and then ran over him.
Do you remember the pain?
Oh, all of it. Yeah, I was awake through every moment. It's exactly like you imagine.
Can you imagine?
I was on asphalt and ice. I wish I was on snow.
He felt it crush his toes, then ankles, then legs, his chest up to his eye that's bulging out.
It was cracked, I believe, and I could see my eye with my other eye. And I just remember seeing stars and like a little tar line, whatever weird thing in this eye.
How was he seeing his other eye? I'm gonna tell you. Most likely what happened is when that eye popped out of the socket, it was protruding enough such that he could catch it from the left eye and see it, which has gotta be freaky. The stars and all those things he's seeing, he was lucky to be seeing stars at that point, in my opinion.
We got him into the back of the ambulance pretty quickly, probably less than 5 minutes. So basically, because his chest wall was so unstable and his breathing was so labored and his oxygen was so low, we inserted needles into his chest to let the pressure out.
You inserted needles into his chest?
Yes. The video states that it took 21 minutes. 21 minutes for the ambulance to get to him because there was so much snow. I want to talk real quickly about why did they have to do this, quote, needle decompression? What does that mean and why were they doing it? In order to educate you about why they had to needle decompress him, let's talk really quickly about a collapsed lung. So if you have an injury to your lung and the little alveoli that have all the air in them leak that air into the space, what's happening is the lung is under tension and very quickly the lung is being compressed smaller and smaller and smaller because there's so much pressure buildup outside of the lung itself that now the lung is so tiny and so collapsed that it can't work. In Jeremy's case, one of his broken ribs probably cut his lung, which led to leaking of air into that space. So how do we save a life in that situation? I have done this so many times in trauma, but let me tell you what they did. In order to relieve the air in that space to allow the lung to re-expand temporarily, you can take a needle and decompress the chest cavity. We take a large bore needle like a 14 gauge needle. We go to the second intercostal space, which is the space between those two ribs. We take that needle and we stick it straight through the chest wall into the chest cavity. You will immediately start to hear hissing. You hear that? As all of the air leaks out of the chest wall cavity and allows the lung to now re-expand and temporarily function. In this case, they needle decompressed both sides because they're only guessing which side has a collapsed lung. He could have collapsed lungs on both sides or one side, but they just needle decompressed to make sure that both lungs were able to re-expand.
Red trauma, the maximum level of trauma.
So we broke 12 on this side, that's the main side.
12 right side,
So when you
2
take
on
a
the
breath
left.
in, instead of filling your chest caves in. That's called a flail chest, which is what
All
he
right,
had.
let's pause here and talk about what is a flail chest. So imagine we cut through ribs on one side, we cut through ribs on the other side, and that segment of the rib cage, when you take a deep breath, normally the lungs will expand and the rib cage expands. In this case, the whole cavity will expand, but that one segment stays collapsed, and that's called a flail segment. Even if you put a chest tube into the cavity to evacuate the air that's leaking to allow the lung to expand, the problem now is when he takes a breath, the chest wall is not functioning properly such that he can't take a deep breath and hold his lungs open. So in that case, most likely what I think probably happened is the trauma surgeon took him to the operating room and they had to put little metal plates and screws to reestablish continuity with the remainder of the chest wall. So now when he takes a breath, everything works together just like before.
Bones broken, around 15% of those in his body.
15%.
One rib pierced his liver.
The liver bleeds like crazy. So that liver laceration, if it's severe enough, that alone could be something that could end it.
See right here on the shin bone, this piece of bone broke off this way and it spiraled down like a barbed pole, like that.
The second injury he talked about there when he was talking about that there was compression or a spiral segment is called a spiral fracture. A spiral fracture to the long bone is generally a compressive, torquing fracture where you see a spiral fracture in the bone from that torque. Now, he may have suffered both kinds of fractures because it looked like at the bottom part, he had what's called a comminuted fracture, meaning there's several bone fragments, but I couldn't see on the x-ray. He may have had other indications of that spiral type of a fracture as well. Now, later in the video, we're going to talk about how we fix that.
Right knee, right ankle broken, left leg tibia broken, left ankle broken, left toes, 3 breaks, 2 middle toes broken, right clavicle broken, right shoulder broken, face eye socket, the jaw, the mandible broken, 3 breaks, lung collapsed, a major laceration in the back of your hip, which they stapled.
This is the one place in plastic surgery that we actually accept using staples, and that's in the scalp.
Still fighting through pain, he's alert enough to ask for a phone and labors to type out a note in case this is goodbye.
Wow.
So I'm writing down notes on my phone, the last words to my family. Don't let me live on tubes on a machine. And don't, if my existence is going to be on drugs and painkillers, Just let me go now.
It doesn't matter that he was typing a message on his cell phone because he's on so many medications and drugs that whatever he types is null and void because he's considered not of sound mind and state. If you don't have a living will, it's not very expensive to create one. You should get together with a lawyer and make one. It's really important. You can be as specific as to say that you don't want tube feeds or IV fluids or pain meds or medications to help keep your heart rate up. Whatever your desires are, that is outlined in the living will. The reason that's important in this scenario is because no matter what he types on that phone, it is meaningless unless he has a document that is signed by him and notarized that these are the wishes that he wants for his life.
He says they put metal plates in his face to rebuild his eye socket, that his jaw is now held together with rubber bands and screws. In his leg, a titanium rod and more screws.
Let's go through those three things. Number one, the orbital fracture. Multiple bones surround the orbit in our eye socket to keep it stable. You can have something called an orbital floor blowout fracture, where the very thin bone in the floor of the eye socket breaks and some of the fat and the tissue within the eye socket can then sink down into your maxillary sinus. That can lead to permanent visual problems if it's not fixed, as well as obviously the eye can look sunken in and not look right. So most likely they had to do multiple repairs of fractures around the eye. They had to reduce or pull that fatty tissue out of the maxillary sinus and put a plate on the floor to support the floor so it can't go back down into the sinus, and then everything should heal well. The second thing they mentioned were jaw fractures and that his mouth was held closed with rubber bands. That does not sound fun. So most likely he had an upper jaw or a lower jaw fracture, and what they do is expose that fracture, put metal plates on it, and in the time period that it's healing, because you can't use the jaw to chew or it won't heal, they'll place screws on the top and the bottom with rubber bands going between the two to kind of hold the jaw in position while the bones are healing. Sometimes we literally had to wire people's mouths shut. I'm sure some people would want to do that to someone they know. The last injury that they showed here that they were repairing was the tibial fracture in the left leg. In this case, for the tibial fracture, you make an incision and expose the tibial bone. You then place a guide wire into the center of the bone through the bone marrow under fluoroscopy, and you guide that wire so that it goes all the way down the bone and then it traverses the actual fracture. So the wire would be our guide to actually place the tibial nail. We would then thread the nail over the guide wire and then hammer it into place under fluoroscopy. We would watch the nail go all the way down the tibial bone until it crossed the fracture. You then can secure them above and below with screws to keep the nail in place until the bone healed. So check out this video here that I posted in the past of the removal of an actual tibial nail, and it seems so brutal, but sometimes you can remove these nails and they don't have to stay in for the rest of their life.
We arrive at Jeremy Renner's house in Los Angeles. Then we expect a quiet sanctuary.
Nice house.
A shattered man recovering from a brutal accident. And the patient is dancing.
Oh, man.
It's been only 10 weeks since that bone-crushing accident.
Squeeze,
Crazy.
squeeze, 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 squeeze.
But every single day for hours, he deploys his ferocious willpower to push through the pain, knowing how lucky he is to have
So
the privilege of his health care and his family cheering him on.
There are several things that I think helped Jeremy survive this. Number one, when Jeremy fell, it looks like the part of the snowcat that ran him over was the part where the tires didn't exist. Had he been underneath the part that had the tires that rotated the track, he most likely would not have made it. The second thing that saved his life most likely were the two people that were by his side the whole time. It's pretty incredible what two humans next to you can do to your spirit to make you fight and stay alive. The third thing that I think helped Jeremy is he is well known to be fit and in shape, and I talk about this all the time, that the most important thing in your life and the most important reason for you to focus on health and wellness is so that if you find yourself in a traumatic situation like this, your body is at the pristine place in order to fight the most that it can to keep you alive. If you're not living a healthy life and your body is in a sick state, then most likely things are going to fail sooner and your capacity to fight is not as strong. If you haven't seen the full video, I would go check it out. Jeremy, I have to say, we've always been a huge fan of your movies. We are so happy that this accident did not take your life, and we cannot wait to see you back on the big screen soon. For now, Dr. Ricky, out.